What's up, everybody? This video I am making for all you guys who watch my 5-part series on how to install an alarm and remote start. You guys watch the video, and in the beginning you love it and everything, and it's like a phenomenal success. I mean, it gets thousands of hits and it's wonderful, and I appreciate it. But you guys keep sending me these messages because you don't understand. When I go onto the bench and I prep my system, how am I doing that and how am I getting all the information? And a lot of you guys reached out to me. You call, you email. I mean, I go out to cut lunch. I come back. There's like 3 messages. Oh, there's another guy from YouTube. He wants to know this and wants to know that. Listen, I'm going to help everybody out in one nice, neat shot, hopefully. What I'm going to plan on doing is I'm going to make a video, and I'm going to use this here Avatel. It's a 5303. It's an alarm, remote start. This thing has every wire you could possibly think of on it. So I'm going to take my time, and I'm going to go through each and every wire and explain the function, what it is, and what it does. So that way, if you have any questions before you get involved in doing one of these jobs, you can refer to this video, and it should pretty much summarize everything that you have a question on. So let's get to it. Okay, so moving on. Now we got this LED plug. This should be pretty self-explanatory. White plug goes right here, right where your manual says it needs to be. That's going to illuminate this light. And just for your own reference, that red wire should show 3 volts, and then the blue wire should show usually about a 250 or a 300 milliamp pulsed output when the alarm is armed, and steady on when it's in valet. Okay, so that's all there is to the LED switch. No big deal there. Now here, where's this one plug in? Right there, it looks like. Okay, so this here is the shock sensor. Now on the shock sensor, you can see that you got 4 wires on there. Okay, just for your own reference, the black wire is a ground, the red is constant 12 volts, or depending on the alarm, it might actually hold off on applying power until the alarm is armed for a shock sensor. And you're typically going to have a blue and a green. From my experience on most systems, not all of them, but just as a, if you ever needed to tie into another system and add another sensor for whatever reason, glass break or a tilt sensor or radar sensor or whatever sensor, the green is typically going to be your pre-warn. So when this one gets a ground pulse, it's going to send a warn away trigger to the alarm system, which will usually translate into like a few quick chirps from the siren. And then you have blue, which is the instant trigger. So when that gets a ground pulse, it's going to set the alarm cycle, the arm, and go off for however long it's going to be going off for, usually about 2 30-second cycles or whatever. So that's your shock sensor. For this particular alarm, it came with this here switch. This switch is not used in most scenarios, but although this is an automatic transmission only type of remote start system, I would not frown on using this for a manual transmission, because I happen to know a trick, and I never really invested into buying manual transmission systems myself. I think they're a pain in the ass. I don't like them. And I think I can share a trick with you if you ever want to know about how to do it in a separate video, because I have people who even have questions about diesels and manual transmissions, so that'll be another day. This plug here, 3 pins, got 2 wires, green and blue. Typically green is going to be a negative on lock, blue is your negative lock, and these here just throw a ground pulse output. On some of these other systems, either this manufacturer or others, these will have reversing outputs. So this one, while this one's throwing a ground, this one will be throwing 12 volts, and then the opposite when you hit unlock. Okay, but this system here is just negative unlock. Now these, if you have a negative type of door locking system in your vehicle, like a Toyota or a Nissan or a Toyota, something like that, these work just fine if you tap it onto the wires in the vehicle right before the factory relays, and the relays are going to do the clicking and actually perform the task of locking and unlocking the doors. But if your car is equipped with either a 5-wire, 1-wire, positive, or something like that in the door locking system, again, you're going to need to get yourself some relays, wire these in, and then use these outputs to click the coils of the relays to do the job. That's the right way, and that's the only way I'm ever going to teach you how to do it. This guy here, valet switch, very straightforward. Again, just plugs in. Blue plug, just like any other alarm I've ever seen before. And you're always going to find on the valet switch, the black is going to be a constant ground, and the gray is going to be a pulse momentary ground that's going to get sent to the alarm module just to let it do either programming, valet mode, or what have you. That's what the valet switch is. Not very sophisticated. So that pretty much wraps up the switch. Actually, I don't know if I told you about this one thing about the switch. This switch is actually designed to be a neutral safety or a safety disable remote start switch. So that way, if you had your car serviced, you could shut down your remote start with this switch. You could hide it someplace. Not that most installers do it anyway, but that's what it's for. LED we got, shock sensor we got, door locks are done, valet switch is done. That's a whole lot of wiring we just covered right there. We're basically halfway there now. So this here is a 4-pin auxiliary harness. Now this one here is called a relay satellite 4-pin connector. Now on here we got a blue, and the definition of this wire says 200 milliamp status output. So that means that this wire here is going to throw a small amount of negative current when the remote start is active, and only when the remote start is active. So if you were hardwiring in a bypass kit or something like that, that is what the purpose of this is. So if you're not using a data bus remote start key bypass or something like that and plugging it in directly into the module, this here is the wire you're going to use to activate that remote start bypass. That's the status output. Now we got a pink here. All this is, instead of, like I showed you before on the main ignition harness output, we had the pink and the pink white for ignition 1 and 2. If you had a special requirement, your car actually had a third ignition output, you would use this, again, in conjunction with a relay, and you would use this to power up that third ignition. Or if you had some other function in the car that you wanted to energize while the remote start was on and that harness couldn't do the job, you would use this in conjunction with a relay to do that task. And that is the negative ignition output. Then we got purple, same kind of deal. It's 200 milliamp. This is a starter relay turn on. So this is going to do the same thing as the heavy gauge starter output on the main ignition harness, except it's going to do the opposite polarity. It's going to do a negative output, a very light transistorized output again. So again, with the relay, if you need to do something to turn either a negative or a positive signal when the car is cranking, this is the wire you're going to use for that. So all it is just a negative transistorized output when the remote start cranks the starter motor over. And then last we got the orange. The orange is again 200 milliamp output, transistorized negative output, and this is for accessories. So like I said, the other harness for the primary ignition harness that turns on the heat, this is going to do the same function, except it's going to do it on a negative output, a transistorized output, which will require a relay to do the function. So this harness, I don't foresee most people using. Some cars are really weird like that, and you need to have these kind of wires to do certain jobs to make the car function properly. But, you know, they give it to you, and it's good that they do. So that harness is done. And we're going to go on to this guy right here, which we have a 5-pin remote start 5-pin connector. Okay. Now on here we have a black-white wire. The definition of this wire is a neutral safety switch input. So all this really is that this wire has to see a ground signal whenever you want to remote start the vehicle. Just that simple. If you don't ground this wire, the car will never remote start. Simple. That's all that's for. And you got a violet-white, which is the TAC input. TAC input is a pretty straightforward thing. If you're not familiar with wiring up a tachometer, I have a separate video on how to find the TAC, which can be pretty helpful. I usually recommend these days, most cars, you know, it's pretty easy to find the fuel injectors that are located right on top of the engine block. You know, say if you got a 4-cylinder engine and they're all 4 in a row, 1, 2, 3, 4, just strip back the tape, and if you have 3 wires on each one of the injectors, you're going to have 2 of those wires that are going to be common on all 4 of the injectors, and that third wire is always going to be different than on each 4 of those injectors. That is one of the TAC signals that you can use. But of course, those are going to be stronger. I mean, less stronger than a normal tack signal. A regular tack, if you went to a coil, is typically going to rest between 3 and 7 volts when the vehicle is running, and it's going to go up and down with the accelerator, hence the tachometer. Okay, so that's what that's all about, the tack. Then we got the brown, which is a brake shutdown wire. Okay, this is on every remote start, and all you have to do to connect this one is on your foot brake switch where you hit the brake. Now, there's going to be usually 2 or sometimes 3, even 4 wires there. The wire you need to connect this to is the wire that's going to rest at ground when you're not touching the brake, and when you press the brake down, it's going to switch to 12 volts. So it's going to rest in the ground, switch to 12 volts, and that's where this is going to go to. So that's that. We got the gray, which they call a negative pin switch input for a hood. So this is, again, an optional wire. You don't have to connect it, but if you had a hood pin switch, like the one that this company provides, and you mounted this underneath your hood, when the switch is up, it's going to send the ground to this wire, again not allowing the remote start to engage. And when the hood is down and this is open, it's not going to show this wire any kind of negative voltage, and it's going to allow the car to start. So that's what the negative hood shutdown or pin switch wire input is for. And last but not least, we got a blue and white. And this here says, again, a 200 milliamp, so it's a negative transistorized output. It's another second status or a rear defrogger output. This one here is a latched output. So what that means is latched is when this wire is energized, it's going to hold that pulse output. So on most cars with a defroster, usually you press the button once and then the car itself will take over and hold that defroster on by a thermostat. Okay, but this wire here, for this brand anyway, which is unique, I must say, uses a latched output for the rear defrogger output. Okay, so that summarizes this here harness. And we got one more I'm going to take care of in this clip before we get to the last section. And this one is a 6-pin harness. Okay, so we got light blue. They're calling this a second unlock output. So what that means is if you were doing a 2-stage unlock where you hit lock on your remote like this, all the doors are going to lock. When you hit unlock, it's going to do the driver door and give the driver a priority unlock. Then you hit it again, and then it's going to do all the other slave motors in the vehicle. So say if you had a 4-door car, when you hit unlock, it's going to do your driver door. Hit it again, it's going to do the other 3 motors so everybody else can come in. Kind of like how the factories have it set up. But you would have to, again, with the relay, have to wire this in and 5-wire that first unlock motor to do that function. And most of the time, you're not going to do that anyway. But I'm making the, and I'm telling you it's there. So now you can say I didn't tell you so. White, black. Again, 200 milliamp auxiliary channel 3 output. So if you had a power trunk, you could apply it to this one. So say if you have a remote like here, you got channel 1 and 2, lock and unlock, pretty straightforward. On the side, you have auxiliary. It says auxiliary right there on the side there. Okay, you got auxiliary, and underneath it there's a star button. So I'm going to presume that channel 3 is going to be that middle button, auxiliary. So if you wanted your power trunk and you had a positive trigger type of trunk, you would wire this again into a relay, invert it from negative to positive, put this to the wire on the car for the trunk pop, and that's going to be controlled by this wire, channel 3. Now you got most likely a channel 4 right here, which is going to do the other button right here. So you have a choice. When you want to make your power trunk, if you want it on this button, you would use this wire, the purple wire, to connect it to the relay to do the trunk. Or if you didn't want it, you wanted it here, you would connect it to this channel. So you have a choice when you have more than one channels like this system here offers. Okay, so you got your 2 auxiliary channels there. Next one, if I can read, says green, white, factory alarm rearm output. Okay, I'll come back to that one, and there's a reason why. Here we go, light green with black. This here is a factory alarm disarm output. So if you have a factory alarm in your vehicle, you want to connect this wire to that wire in the car. And how you could find the factory disarm wire is very easy. Well, it's easy if you have long arms or if you have a buddy there to help you. All you do is take your key, stick it in your door, keep turning it to the unlock position, and look in either driver boot or in the kick panel area. One wire is going to rest either very low or with a little bit of voltage, and it's going to switch to ground when you turn it to the unlock position. That's typically the way most vehicles work, and that's going to be a factory disarm. It's going to shut down the factory security, so that way when you hit remote start, the factory alarm doesn't wig out and honk the horn and drive you and your neighbors insane. So that's what that wire there is for. That's a factory disarm. And then we got a gray black on this system. They call it a wait to start input. So again, if you were not doing an automatic transmission vehicle, but you were doing one with a diesel, this wire here you would have to connect to the glow plug of your vehicle. So what's going to happen is, on a wait to start or glow plug wire, that wire you have to wait for the ground to go away, and once it does, this system's going to recognize that, and then it's going to attempt to crank the starter. So that's what the wait to start is. You can also call it a glow plug input. Okay, so again, don't worry about the color, worry about what the function of wire is. So wait to start wire or glow plug input, that's what that's all about. And getting back to that green white that I blew off before, the factory alarm rearm output. In some cars you have to disarm the factory security even when you hit unlock, and then what happens is you want the factory security to stay armed after you're done, doing what you're doing in the car and you get out. So you would wire this into the system, so it would send a negative pulse to the alarm system to rearm itself after you either remote started, unlock the door, or whatever. So that's what this wire here is for. So that harness is done. We got one more to go, and then we'll be done. Okay, this is the last harness. See, it wasn't that hard, right? This is pretty typical of just about any car alarm system, with or without a remote start. These are all pretty common colors. I mean, we're working on a DEI alarm. The only thing that really changes are these two. This here is the positive door trigger, negative door trigger. You use one or the other. These colors typically tend to change across different manufacturers for whatever reason. But again, we're working with this alarm system, so I'm going to function with what I'm working with. But again, don't listen to what colors they are. Just listen to me tell you what the functions of the wires are. That's all you need to really understand. Okay, so let's start here. Red, white, 200 milliamp trunk release output. So what this is yet another auxiliary output. So if your car was equipped with a sunroof, a gas door pop, and a trunk release, that's 3 auxiliary channels. So you would use one on here. Going back to that other harness, you would have channel 2, channel 3, and then you would have this one you would utilize for the 3rd auxiliary output, and that's how you would wire all those things into the system. Again, using relays. Because if you don't use relays and you put it directly to the function, you could easily burn out that transistorized output on the alarm, and that's not a good thing. Next we have a red constant 12 volt power input. I hope that you know what that is. Put it to constant 12 volts. Use the fuse, of course. Then we got brown. That there is your positive siren output. So this is going to go to the siren. Now, of course, they don't match the colors. They got to make it that way. So you got a positive output. That goes to the red on this siren. The black would go to chassis ground, okay, for your siren. Okay, so brown is your positive output to your siren. And whenever you do ground your siren, I always recommend that you bring your ground wire into the vehicle through the firewall along the negative output, because out there it does tendency to get wet, crusty, it could corrode and fail, and you don't want that. You want your alarm to last. Now we got the black, super important connection. Go to a good factory bolt, get a nice clean ground. I can't stress that enough. That will make havoc on your alarm if you don't do that right. And we got this wire here, violet. This is the positive door trigger input. So if your vehicle has a door pin switch or a dome light circuit that rests at ground, and when you open the door it switches to 12 volts. This is the wire that's going to go to that in your car. So first you have to determine if your vehicle is equipped with a negative dome light circuit or a positive. If you have a positive style, that's the wire for you. If you have a negative, you're going to use this one, the green, okay? And just cut that purple one because you don't need it. You use one or the other. You don't use both. Okay, so if your wire rests at either nothing or a little voltage when the door is closed and switches to ground when it's open, this is going to go to that in your vehicle. And that's going to go off whenever your doors are opened. Blue, this goes to, typically you're going to go to your hood and trunk, so that way when your trunk is open, it's going to send a negative pulse into your security system, making the alarm trigger. Okay, if you're going to tie this into the hood pin switch that I showed you before for the remote start, make sure you put a couple of diodes in there, because if you open up the hood, you don't want that to feed back into the trunk and leave your trunk light on. So that's something worth notating to you. So the blue goes to hood and trunk. Now we got black and white. This here is the dome light output, dome light supervision, or entry illumination, some manufacturers call it. This is a cool feature. I like it. I always do this feature. So what happens here is when the alarm is disarmed, this is going to send a transistorized negative output. You put that in conjunction with a relay, wire it in, and then you tie the output into the door trigger's input. So for instance, if you have a negative dome light circuit and you're using the green wire, you're going to take that black white, you're going to put that to one side of the coil, put some power on the opposite side of the coil, feed it ground on that side, on the top, on 87. 30 is going to go out to the, and every time you hit unlock, it's going to put ground signal into the dome light circuit. So even though the door is closed and it's resting at nothing, when you put ground to it, it's going to illuminate the interior dome lights, which is a nice feature. And also when your alarm goes off, in conjunction with your parking lights blinking, it's also going to make the dome light blink, so it's kind of like back and forth. It makes a nice little disco show. It's a cool little feature. Now we got 3 left. We got the white blue. This is the remote start activation input. This only applies if you're using this as a slave add-on remote start system. Of course, if you have this with your 2 new remotes, why would you? But if you put ground to this wire, that's going to externally start the vehicle. Instead of using the remote to start the vehicle, a ground pulse on this white with a blue wire activation input is going to do the same thing. The white wire on this system is a selectable output. If you look on this brain here, there's a little clip there. You can move left or right. So if you have a positive flashing light or parking light circuit, you would place it here. If it's negative, you could just move it on over. And whichever position you put it on is what's going to determine what the polarity of the output of this wire is going to be. So if you have a parking light circuit which is a positive type, then you would just leave this in default position, or just make sure that it's in the positive setting. Connect this to the parking light circuit, and that's it. But if you have negative, you're going to want to move that jumper over and leave this wire and connect it to it that way. Not a big deal. Now this one here is the orange. This is a ground when armed output. In this system, you don't need to really use it because they were good enough about giving you these 2 wires which do the starter kill circuit built into this external relay. But if you didn't have that luxury, you would use that orange wire, you would connect it once again to a relay, put it on there, you would cut the starter wire, put it on these 2 terminals, ignition or the other side of the starter circuit, so the relay clicks when you try to turn the key on, and you would have your starter disable, and that's all there is to that. So that's really it. We did the siren, the module, the harness, the ignition harness. We went over some of these auxiliaries. We talked a lot about this relay, the 2 auxiliary harnesses, valet switch, door lock plug, neutral safety plug, shock sensor, LED. That's it. Class is out of session.